Hey, Crossroads Online, welcome. So glad to be joining us here today. We are going to be continuing our Q&A series throughout Face Up Relationships. And Face Up Relationships is just an opportunity, like how to get authentic in our relationships, whether it's sex, dating, or parenting. And this past week, Pastor Brian, you led our message on sex, and we look forward to having that conversation together. Thank you so much, Ashley, for being our chat host. If you guys are on Facebook or YouTube, you can go to crossroadsgrace.org/online, and there we'll have a chat host available for you. You can ask questions live as we're having this conversation. And if you're watching this video later, hey, thank you so much for tuning in and being connected with us. I pray that this just benefits you today and is an opportunity for you to get connected with what we're doing as we go throughout the series. If you want more information about our current series that we're going through, you can go to crossroadsgrace.org/services, or you can go to our YouTube page or our Facebook page, and there we'll have our messages throughout the series and our Q&As that you can find out more information and get more content from as well.
You know, I was thinking about, as you're saying that, if somebody's working right now and their boss comes up and be like, "Hey, what are you listening to?" That'd be an awkward conversation. So, yeah. Good on you.
Yeah, yeah. So very, very proud of you. You might be embarrassed to talk to your boss about sex. Apparently, I'm not. So
let's go, baby.
Let's do this. All right. So anyway, we're gonna have this conversation. It's gonna be really great. And just a fair warning, if you have any little ones in the room right now or you're listening through your car, we are talking about sex, so now would be a good time to switch over to a different device, maybe some headphones if you feel like that would be appropriate. Just a fair warning, want to let you know. Before we talk about sex, Pastor Brian, I just wanted to mention something. You mentioned the beautiful love that you have for Giordano's deep dish pizza in Chicago.
It's a deep love.
Yeah, it is a deep love. What many people don't know is that we both live in Chicagoland area for different seasons throughout our lives, and have found a love for deep dish Chicago style pizza. Yeah. However, just like how the Dodgers and the Giants have this hated rivalry, deep dish pizza in Chicago has a hated rivalry as well. Deep and unfortunately, we're on different sides of this rivalry. We are on
very different sides. This is the closest I feel comfortable.
Yeah, is that as good as you go? All right. Well, it's too bad. So you love Giordano's pizza,
yes, right? Love it.
Okay, and then I'm a Lou Malnati's fan. And if you are familiar with those two pizza places, just put it in the chat. Let us know. Hey, what's your favorite pizza? I would love to be able to prove Pastor Brian wrong what the best pizza is. So that would be really great. That'd be really great.
Yeah, this will be really great. Yeah.
Well, anyway, all right. So we're diving in here, and let's get down to business. Your message was absolutely fantastic, and I know I saw a lot of people coming up to you after the message. That some people in tears, some people were just so thankful, some people just had more questions for you. Yeah. And I was just curious, what do you feel like the sense was of how this message affected our church, affected people who listened to it?
Well, it's really interesting because the feedback that I got, and maybe that you even had, it's just very mixed in the sense that some people hit it this way, some people hit it that way. You know, had a couple that said that actually took advantage of that opportunity to share some things that were in their past with one another. So that's a deeply passionate thing that you have to kind of walk through. Other people that are saying, you just read my mail. Like, you know, as a communicator, you have people that say that, man, you just read my mail, and there's going to be some good conversations that come out of that about getting back in the circle and not closer to the line and those types of things. But I think what I appreciated the most is that people appreciated the fact that we talked about it. That there was a lot of people that had come up, and maybe it was their first time, and that's always an interesting one. Come to church the first time, it's the sex topic. But they said, I appreciate the fact that you are a church that's willing to talk about things that other people won't. And if you haven't been around Crossroads very long, we don't really shy away from anything. We're going to go right into it because that's where Jesus would have been. And so the overarching sentiment that I had was an appreciation for thank you for doing that. Thank you for letting my kids hear it and letting me have some handles to be able to have conversations with other people later. And so overall, I believe that the sentiment was, this is what needed to happen. I'm really glad you did it. So I'm excited to see what God does.
Yeah, it's been really cool. And the questions that you guys have provided have just been really showing that exact same thing.
Yeah.
There's just been a real interest and understanding to see what God has to say about this topic. One of the things that you said in your message, you said, when he says that keeping the marriage bed pure, that means to have sex for the right time, the right place is within marriage. And again, what this really boils down to is this question: how close to the line can I get?
Yeah.
I feel like that's a topic that a lot of people who struggle with dating and having sexual integrity might want to have a better understanding and answer to. Yeah. Why do you think this question is so important to get right when it comes to dating and relationships?
Well, I wish I could say that the question of how close can I get to the line is one that's just primarily just for the conversation of sex. But you see it really, if you think about it, you see it in all different ways. So if you want to get fit and you want to exercise, you want to lose weight, you ask yourself the question: how close to the line can I get of donuts and to foods that aren't good for me? Right? How much of this can I eat and still accomplish my goals? So it's you can see it throughout those types of everything. But when it comes to sex, I really believe it's that when sin cracked the circle and it started to leak out, people have had an appetizer of what that experience could be, and it's a sensation that people want more and more and more of. So they want to say, well, gosh, I want to try to get as much of it I can as the Costco samples, if you will, before I have to buy the actual meal and become married. Right. That I think so many people are saying, gosh, I just want to get to the line because then as long as I'm not sinning, I'm going to be okay. But I think if we don't get that question right in our heart on the deep level, not on the practical, this is what I'm doing and not doing, why am I wanting to ask that question? I don't know if we'll ever really find the true answer that we're looking for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And I think people so easily want a list and a to-dos and don'ts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I think there's a place for that opportunity to be able to outline. But if you're not focused on the heart issue of why you think that there needs to be a line or why you need to be pursuing ultimately sexual integrity in life, then you're just going to end up moving that line forward and changing your definition of where the goalposts are, essentially.
Well, but also if you think about it too, let's look at it from, we oftentimes talk about religion and relationship. And we look at religion as a list of rules, of do's and don'ts. Do this and follow God. You can't do right, and back and forth. Whereas relationship, it's where God's saying, I want to know you, I want to have a connection with you deeper than just this list of things to do. And so many people get excited about the relationship part because people have been turned off from religion by saying, I don't want a list of what I can and can't do, rah, rah, rah.
Yeah.
But yet there are certain things in our life where people say they want a list. So give me the list of things that I can do to get as close to the line as I possibly can. Almost give me the religion of sex that I can do and not do. But yet they don't want that relationship with Jesus that gives them something deeper than what this list would ever give them. Yeah. And so again, the deep heart issue, if we can't get that right, we're never going to experience the joy that God wants us to have in our relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things you said near one of the moments at the end of your message, as you're kind of outlining the cards that people should lay out, you said this: we must understand the power that sex has in our relationships. I mentioned, this is you talking, I mentioned how important it is, and I should also be clear that it can be used in 3 different ways: as a weapon against one another, a wedge to keep you apart, or as a welcome to deepen intimacy with each other. Sexual deprivation will destroy your marriage. And kind of my question is, how can a spouse begin to talk with their partner if they're struggling with the other person, or maybe them themselves, who uses sex as a weapon or a wedge in their relationship? What do you think is the best advice you can give them to move forward with that?
Well, usually when sex is being used as a weapon or a wedge, it means the communication is really broken down, because those are usually silent killers. You don't, sometimes you might say, like, well, you know what, if you don't clean empty the dishwasher, you ain't getting some tonight. Like, that would be using it as a weapon, right? Or you can use it as a wedge, where it's this silent assassin in your bedroom where you don't ever even really talk about it. All you do is just you keep denying and saying no and saying right without ever having communication. So when a weapon and wedge happens, it's usually where communication's broken down. So obviously the answer to that would be to begin to talk about it, to express your feelings with one another, to say, hey, when you did this, it made me feel this way, or did you even know that you were doing this? And then also, if you are the ones that are wielding the weapon or inserting the wedge, you have to ask the question of, why am I doing that? And does that person know why they're doing it? Now, again, I want to make sure I said it in the message. I'll say it 1,000 times. If the reason that you have a wedge or a weapon in your marriage with sex is because of an emotional or physical or some sort of abuse that's happening, there's no amount of sex that's going to fix that. You have to get help. You have to work through that in a healthy way. So I just want to make sure that we say that up front. But when there is health in there, and these things still do kind of sneak into a relationship, we've got to communicate. We've got to be understanding of where we're coming from, and then looking at sex in a different way that really is a welcome for people to be able to deepen their intimacy with each other.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, let's dive into the questions. You guys submitted some questions this past weekend for Pastor Brian to talk about when it comes to this topic about sex. If you are interested in furthering the conversation, I encourage you to jump on to our crossroads.org/online. There we'll have a chat host available for you. You can ask questions live, and we will respond to those as well. Thank you so much for those of you who have tuned in. One person even said that I'm at work and the volume is low right now. All right, here we go. So anyway, we're going to start off with our first question for today, and it says this: is it biblically wrong for a woman to turn down her husband sexually? And I would also just add the caveat for the man to turn down their wife sexually.
Yeah, because sometimes I would say in this question, it usually tends to be the woman towards the husband, but it obviously can be both ways too. In fact, I met with a couple a few weeks ago where that was actually something that was happening. So I would say let's start off by going back to Scripture. So 1 Corinthians chapter 7, I read it in the service, and it's saying that the husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Now, again, this is important. Do not deprive each other, except perhaps by, important caveat here, mutual consent, meaning both of you say, hey, I agree to this, and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. But then, very important, it says, then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So I would say when we're having that, we've got to come back to Scripture. We've got to understand what the circle was designed to be, to bring us closer together as husband and wife, asking the question, why do I want to continually turn that person down? Why do I want to do that? I think what's important for us to remember is that if we truly love one another, yes, maybe it's not having sex every night, like when you're a newlywed and everything's all fun and games, but as your marriage matures, there's going to be seasons, but you have to communicate why that is. And if the reason you're turning them down, your husband or your wife, is because of something that they're doing or saying, or there's some sort of maybe in your past that's holding you back, to work through that, you have to be able to communicate through it. And so is it biblically wrong for a woman to turn down her husband? I don't think it's wrong, as it said, for mutual consent if there's a reason. But if it's constantly used, maybe as a weapon or a wedge, then that's something that is sinful. That's something that we have to work through. Because although sex is not the main part of the relationship, it still is a part of it. And God did allow us to go to have it so that it would bring us closer. So if you are turning each other down, you really are creating a division in your bedroom that you need to be aware of. And as it says at the last part here, it says that you come back together so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So just know that as you deny each other sexually, you're giving an opportunity for a foothold from Satan to literally be in your bed with you. Is almost that visual you should think about.
Yeah, that's really dangerous. I think the first thing that comes to mind as I'm reading this one is I have so many more questions for the person to why that's taking place.
Sure.
You know, is it abuse on either side? Is it because of infidelity? Is it because of mistrust? Is it because they have just grown relationally distant and that's caused them to grow sexually distant? And there's this kind of cascading effect that takes place where you're not able to reinvigorate the relationship with sexual intimacy. And so kind of my first thing is like there's got to be more questions that are asked to why that is taking place. Because I think that there could be legitimate grounds for why, this is not healthy, a recent pregnancy or someone giving birth to a child. I think those are things that are to be considered in this prospect, and that verse shouldn't be imposed to every situation. In the general sense, there's an understanding that our bodies are our spouses and they're not our own.
Right.
And we need to be sure that we're being faithful to them and be able to offer them that opportunity for sexual intimacy so that we can experience a greater connection with each other. Because to go too long, if things are overall going well, is just going to bring you guys further apart, and there's going to be some missed opportunities for connection.
Yeah, good point.
The next question is, how can I rebuild trust and connection in my marriage after a breach of sexual fidelity?
Yeah, nice light question. So no, it's so important though. It's so important, and I mentioned this. I believe it was last week, that needs to be reiterated in this idea of trust, and that trust is slowly gained but very quickly lost. And I've yet to see something more painful in a relationship than marital infidelity, especially when it comes to trust. Because again, we have to remember what sex is viewed in God's eyes. It's not just this physical union that takes place, but it's actually a commingling of souls, that you're uniting yourself together in the most vulnerable and intimate way possible. And so you really have to trust one another, both physically, but also emotionally, and it's a spiritual connection that's happening. So when someone breaks that trust by going in and having sex with somebody else or outside the marriage, not only have you broken the covenant that you've made with one another, but you've actually torn the spiritual oneness that you have created. And that is a very difficult scar to be able to heal. And so what needs to be understood is that if you are the one that cheated on your spouse, you need to understand that you no longer control the rate at which someone is going to trust you anymore. The ownership is completely on the other person. You have relinquished your right to speed up this process. And I talk to so many guys, and I think you probably have too, that when this happens, we as guys, we just want to hurry up. Well, it's been a week. Aren't we good? Like I said, I'm sorry. I bought some flowers. Let's just move on from this thing. And that's just not the type of damage that's actually been done. This is a deep, deep, deep hurt that's happened, and you need to understand it's going to take some time. Now, on the other side of it, though, is the person that's asking for that trust to be rebuilt. And that is going to be probably one of the hardest spiritual conversations and prayers that you're going to have with God. God, give me the opportunity to trust them again. Show me how I can trust them again. What does trust look like again in our relationship? And that probably is not going to start in the bedroom. That's probably going to start by being home on time when you said you were, by being open with the passwords that you have on your phone. These little incremental building blocks of trust are going to then allow you to have that deeper trust again. And I would argue that what you're trying to get at, and you probably hear this, people say this too, I just want it to get fixed and go back to the way it used to be. No, you don't. No, you don't. Because at some point, what used to be the old way caused you to get to the place that you're at right now, where someone cheated. Now, it doesn't mean it was one person's fault, but there must have been something that was broken. So what we want to try to get to is back to where Jesus is at, back in the circle of trust again. But to be able to understand that that's going to take time and you can't rush it.
Yeah, I'd say two things. For the person who committed the act of infidelity, you have lost your freedom in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
In order to rebuild trust, you've got to lose your freedom in order, like with text messages, passwords, with your schedule, so that you can rebuild that trust. Because until you rebuild pieces of that trust, you will never be able to create the snowball that creates a better relationship. Yeah. And so I think that's one thing. For the person on the other side who feels betrayed, who feels like maybe they weren't good enough as a result of that experience of infidelity, I would just caution you against some of those own thoughts that you have. In order to rebuild trust, you're also going to realize that you can't control the other person either. And you can't get back a sense of control as a result of the infidelity that has taken place. And so one of the things to pay attention to in that process is to just watch your own heart, to make sure that you aren't getting too much control to where there's no opportunity for trust to be rebuilt. And I can imagine someone who is listening in this conversation is thinking to themselves, well, what about pornography? Is that infidelity in and of itself? What would be your answer to someone who asked that?
Well, 100%. Yeah, 100%. And because, again, if we come back to trust and we come back to what God has called us to do, as far as we should be a one woman, a man with one woman, and a man or a woman with one man. Like when you enter in anything, even if it's a digital version of another person, you are breaking that covenant, because as we'll get to a little bit later, our eyes are very powerful, which then create images, which then create tendencies and sinfulness, and I think we just need to be mindful of that. I will also go on to say this, that there also can be another mistress in your relationship that doesn't necessarily have to be another person sexually. I mean, I've seen the mistress of drugs and alcohol and all kinds of things that wedge their way into your relationship that you need to be mindful of, and you need to get rid of those things and learn to trust one another again.
That's really good. Yeah. Well, let's move on to the next question. And if you want to ask a question but you don't feel comfortable putting it in the chat, I encourage you to chat Ashley directly, our chat host. There she can just copy and paste that, put it in the chat. Someone asked. So Ashley, if someone does that, just put someone asked and then quotations, put the question in there so that we can make sure that if you don't feel comfortable asking the question publicly, we can at least do it privately. So question 3, how can I address the pressures to conform to societal pressures about sex while staying true to my beliefs?
Yeah. If you had a chance to listen to the message, I made this interesting analogy of like how I grew up in South Dakota, and I said my O's, and then I moved to Chicago, and I started to have my A's in Chicago, and pizza and Giordano's, right? All of these things. And then I moved to California, and everything changed, and it's almonds and almonds. And this idea of who you're around sometimes shapes what you do. And so I said again, it might be great for accents and food, but it's terrible for you spiritually. And so you have to remember that you are supposed to be against what this world is about, because this world is sinful. And I'll go back to Jesus in John 15, where he says, if you belong to this world, it would love you as its own. Now that's important to consider. The world will love you. If you say, hey world, I'm for you, it will gladly embrace you. And it will love you as its own, he says. But he goes on to say, as it is, you do not belong to the world. So what does that mean? It means as followers of Jesus, we've separated ourselves from what the world says, and now we're connected to what Jesus says. And he says, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. Now that's strong language, because we tell our kids, you don't want to hate anybody, don't use the hate word, but Jesus uses the word hate because that is what the world is going to look at you as, and it's going to hate you because of what you believe in Jesus, because it goes against what everything is that the world says to do. So I would probably, sometimes the best litmus test is, does the world hate you for what you believe in some ways? And if you're not going up at the grain of what the world is saying, then you probably have to ask yourself, am I in the right lane? Jesus would say so many things. He would say, right, that broad is the road that leads to destruction, but narrow is the path that leads to eternal life, right? This idea that you have these two ways of going, and the broad road is well paved. You can go as fast as you want, but on this narrow road where Jesus is at, it's hard and rocky, and you kind of have to get up. And so I think what I would just say to this point is that the pressure to conform to societal pressure is always going to be there. But the opportunity to follow Jesus despite that pressure is also going to be there. And you will always have this moment, a crossroads in your life, almost every day. Do I watch that show? Do I not watch that show? Do I support this? Do I not support this? Like, you have to ask yourself that. And those crossroads gives you an opportunity to either follow Jesus or not. Jesus would also tell us that he'll never tempt us beyond what we can bear. That's where people kind of misconstrue and say, God will never give you more than you can handle. What a bunch of garbage that is. He's going to give you all kinds of stuff that you can't handle. But it says he'd never be tempted. So if there's a temptation, you also have the chance to overcome it because of Jesus. And so I would just say, remember that if you're feeling societal pressure, follow the way of Jesus. Know it's never going to go away this side of heaven, and just trust the fact that if the world is hating what you're believing, you might just be on the right path.
Yeah, that's really good. One of the things I like to do is just kind of play out what are the implications of following that path.
Sure.
And just kind of take steps forward. I mean, if the friend show is telling me that I can have premarital sex with whoever I want, and it's just a fun recreational activity, well, let's play out what that actually looks like. And even science itself points to the idea that is going to be broken, that's going to lead to detachment issues, and it's going to lead to a lot of other problems in life. Yeah. So if you look at like the outcome of what the future down the line looks like, it's going to be really damaging. So that's one of the practical advice that we get from God's word is so powerful that if you live it out to its fullest, you're going to experience better sexual relationship with your spouse, better intimacy with other people as a result of pursuing his path than our world's path. And I think both subjectively and objectively we can point to that being a reality.
Well, let me read this fourth one because I'd love to hear your thought on it. So the fourth one says, what do you do when you aren't in love with the person you married that you married to anymore?
Yeah, I think.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think this just begs a lot of questions to follow up with. And I think that there's some sense in which there's potential pain that has taken place. Yeah. There's potential neglect. Maybe the life has been all about the kids and getting them from point A to point B, and there hasn't been enough time to refocus towards themselves. One of the things I hear from people who have their last kid at home graduating from high school is they're like, oh, I've got to re-find out who my wife or my husband is because I've totally forgotten. It's just been a rat race of constantly moving and doing things and not focusing on that relationship. So I think that there's a lot of potential damages that could be done. Mm-hmm. I think there's also a sense at which if you don't feel that sense of love, I think you have some good points that you're about ready to allude to as well, where there's also this sense at which we all start off with like an infatuation of love, and then that also causes us to think that that's how it should always be. But that initial first moments of love are so powerful and so connecting that I've known students that I've mentored that have started a new relationship and they were struggling with pornography beforehand, but once they get into that new relationship, the addiction to pornography is gone. Well, what science tells us is that the same chemicals that are released while we're pursuing pornography is also being released when we're pursuing that new love and that new relationship. And so it's not that you have lost that need for that dopamine hit or that addiction, but it's that it's just transferred the source. And so there's a lot of potential damage if you think that staying in love, being in love, that infatuation, that initial lovey-dovey stage, that is a lot of fun for sure.
Yeah.
But if you think that that should be normative, then you're really missing out on God's deeper connection that he wants you to bring with another human being in the context of marriage. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, don't you we know that the Greek for love is so nuanced.
Right.
That there's so many different ways that you can, because when we think of love, when inside the marital relationship, we have a certain connotation of what that looks like, but there is eros, and there is agape, and there's phileo, and there's all these different versions of love that you read about in Scripture. And so if you really think about it, so agape love is this like unconditional love that's really only found in God, that we would hope that someday we could ascribe to have agape love with one another. I don't know if that'll ever be possible this side of heaven. This eros love is this idea of, it's kind of the exciting love. It's some erotic love, almost this like the stuff that we talk about when you're first in love, like you're so excited. And then there's this phileo love, which is more of like a familial or friendship type of love that is more long lasting. And so if you kind of, if you think about it, this image just came into my mind, is that if you think about when a space shuttle takes off from the ground, there's a lot of energy that exerts to get the rocket ship off the ground. And so there's a bit of this phileo love in the early stages of your marriage that is kind of taking it to the next level almost. But then you eventually get to the spot where the boosters fall off, and you've got this smaller little jet that gets you up, because you're trying to get in the atmosphere of marriage, this orbiting of this is how we're going to live. And the orbiting around the earth is really the phileo love. It's more friendship love than eros love, because eros love can only last so long. It's got such a short burst. Yeah, you might experience it here and there in the confines of your marriage, but I would just say it's interesting that I think when you have sex early on in your marriage versus sex later in your marriage, it's different. It just doesn't have the same sort of love to it. It's still great, it's still amazing, but it's different. And I think if we allow people to understand that love is going to morph and change as you become married and as you years into your marriage, I think that helps people to understand a little bit. I reached out to a friend of mine. He's a marriage and family therapist for years and years. His name's Tim Sutherland. He sent me some interesting things. He actually said that there's an excellent book called The Loving Limerence. And in it, he says that they suggest that the shelf life of romantic love is 18 months at most, it says. He says, so the best one can hope for is, if being in love is super important, is falling back in love with their spouse after they've fallen out of love with them. We have to understand 18 months is about the eros amount of time that you've got to be able to be in love. And then, of course, I think something interesting, some sociological data that up until the 1950s, in-loveness, like being in love, was never a motivational or a goal in marriage. Up until the 1950s. It's an ideal presented by a secular humanist following culture that has been around less than 100 years. So this idea of this being the end-all be-all is actually not. Because if you were to interview people that said that they're happily married, most of them are not going to say it's because that they were in love with each other. It's because they actually are, they love each other, but in a friendship love. Like they are just really, really good friends. And so I think we need to balance the expectations that we have for our marriages a little bit. That you might not be in love like when you first got married, but you're going to be in love with them in a new way. And that might just be what you need to consider as you're maturing in your relationship, that love changes.
Yeah. And that points to your message, there's different seasons for love. It just kind of fluctuates, and sexual intimacy is along those lines as well. I would pay attention to your schedules. I'd pay attention to your sense of curiosity for the other person. I've sometimes been on dates with my wife, and to be perfectly honest, I'll use the restroom and I'll just quickly Google questions to ask on a date, and I'm looking for a new question that I can ask her, that I can find out something new about her. It's just something. It's a treasure to be able to pursue and understand the other person. And so maybe trying that. If you're in a season where maybe you haven't had sexual intimacy for a long season, and there's no particular root cause other than maybe just delayed maintenance, try to do something different. Try and spice that up a little bit, because those are all opportunities for you to rekindle that connection. The body is designed to connect with another person within this sense of sexual intimacy. And in the process of sexual intimacy, there's a lot of chemicals that are released, like dopamine and oxytocin. Oxytocin is the same thing that is released when a mother is breastfeeding their child, and that's that sense of bondingness that takes place. That same chemical is released in both individuals during sexual intimacy. And so if you're feeling a sense of disconnection or lack of love, and there's no prior like underlining problem, maybe it's just delayed maintenance, I'd encourage you, just pursue your sexual intimacy with your partner and make advances towards that, because that'll bring you guys closer together.
And I think this is important to say at this time too, is that when I hear people say that, like, I just don't know if I'm in love with them anymore, sadly what I see is really quickly followed behind that is, and that's why I think I'm going to leave them, or that's my grounds for divorce, that we just aren't in love anymore. And I just want to be really clear. The Bible doesn't give us that as an out. It just isn't in there. And really what that falls in line with is more really this, whatever makes me happy, do that. So are we looking for, do I want to be happy, or am I looking for love? Like, what am I looking for? And what God says is that we are in this together. We have made a covenant between each other and in God. And so we need to make sure that we are honoring that covenant and realizing that seasons do happen. So I sure would hate for somebody to nuke their marriage because in a season of unloveness is happening, when we don't know if that's going to come back around and could be restored in a really beautiful new way. And you might have missed out on it if you just jumped out of the plane and pulled the ripcord.
And be careful not to put all the blame on the other person, or to accept that because you've done something that is just causing damage that it can't be repaired. Have a sense of hope. Have a sense of hope in recognizing that God turns ashes into beauty, and give yourself an opportunity to believe in the hope that is the gospel, right? That grace is possible, forgiveness is possible, renewed relationship is possible as well. If Jesus can be risen from the grave, your relationship with your spouse has potential to be resurrected as well.
Good.
So I'd also just want to make sure that we get to this chat question that we have.
Cool.
And this is by Sanja. I have a hard time seeing red flags in men. Any advice?
Well, some of that is probably, as you've been saying, more questions to be asked. And some of that, anytime you're entering into a relationship, you're entering with some of your past that's a part of it also. So asking yourself, how was your relationship, the relationship with your mom and dad? What are the relationships that you've seen around? And let me give you an example. Sometimes if you have been in a home where the husband and wife, maybe mom and dad, were abusive to one another, maybe there was alcohol that was involved, you see that environment somewhat as normative almost. And so what to somebody on the outside is saying, like, hey, that's weird. Like, my parents don't throw things at each other. You're like, oh, really? I didn't realize that happened. So that wasn't a red flag to you because you've become normative, almost numb to it. So I would ask some of those questions. And this is really another thing of where you bring in another person into the conversation, maybe somebody that you trust, that's married, that's been down the road, has got more experience, and say, hey, what am I missing? What do you see that I'm not seeing? Be some extra set of eyes, because right now all I can see is that he's beautiful and he's got a nice chin, or maybe she's beautiful and she's whatever. So bringing somebody in to be that like voice of reason to you, I think could help you identify red flags. Now, here's the problem. It's still up to you. So that person that you involve in the relationship, they're not going to be the ones that grab your hand and put the rings on. You have to make that decision. But if you trust that person and involve them, I think that's important. So understanding your past is really important. Bringing other people in that can maybe identify red flags. And then the third thing I would say is, are we really praying about it? Like, are we really asking God to open our eyes to this and see it for what it truly is? Instead of seeing it for what I want it to be. I don't know what you add to that.
Yeah, I think also paying attention to what are you pursuing at the same time.
Sure.
Because I think you miss the red flags, it might be because there's a blind spot in what you're actually looking for.
Yeah.
So pay attention to maybe the wake of men that have been in your life, and asking yourself the question, is there some commonalities that are there too? Are there some similarities to each of these individuals that make it to where you keep falling for the same type of person that is a red flag person? They're just not a good person to pursue in a relationship. I'd also pay attention to, what do his friends say about him? What do the previous girlfriends say about him too? do some research and find out, ask questions, because how they ended their previous relationship says a lot about how they're going to treat you as well. Now, you can't always hold people to that perfectly, because we all make mistakes. We all have damage in our past and past relationships. But when just do your research, ask questions, get to figure out what do other people think about them. And if they have a lot of consistent, even their best buddies, a lot of consistent negative problems that keep on coming up, then don't blindly walk in, no, he wouldn't do that to me, or we wouldn't have that issue together, or he's grown up, he's matured past that. Just wait and see, see what those relationships are like.
Yeah.
And then see people in the different seasons as well. I know that people have different timelines for when they want to start dating, from when they started meeting someone, but oftentimes it's good to pay attention to someone for a few seasons to see what are they really like, because that initial infatuation, while it can help you guys kind of overlook some little things that might get in the way of getting married someday, but there's also this sense of which you're kind of blinded a little bit.
Yeah.
And so not letting that infatuation take over too much is really a key part of paying attention to those red flags. What do the seasons look like with this person, and how are they responding to different challenges that they're facing as well?
Wouldn't it be amazing if you had reference checks for everybody that you dated, though?
That would be great.
I'd love to go out with you, but I'm going to need 3 or 4 reference checks. So,
all right, so next question. Let me check the chat real quick. Okay, next question is, what about God's chosen, such as Jacob, who had multiple partners? Can we go into explaining the hows and whys on things that seem to be contradictory? And so the contradictory part is like we have this sense of monogamy. God wants us to be in a monogamous relationship. Yeah. But then we also see these examples in the Old Testament of where Abraham had multiple wives, David had multiple wives, Solomon, let's not get started on Solomon, right? So what would you say to someone who brought up that challenge and contradiction?
Well, I would come back to the idea that God's design was a circle. And in that circle was one man with one woman for a lifetime, with sex at the center, with all these things. We remember the circle. And then when sin came in, it cracked the circle, and then sex took the lead. It went out to the beginning. It's like, hey, I'm going to lead the sin charge. It really happened that way. And when that happened throughout the Bible, a lot of those people that you mentioned, Jacob, Abraham, David, Solomon, man, sex was a huge part of that, which then in turn turned into multiple wives.
Idolatry as well. Yeah.
700 wives for Solomon, 300 concubines. That's a lot of, it's 1,000 ladies to try to figure. But the reality, though, is that even at the end of that, in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, you get to read about it, where he gets to all Solomon says, I tried everything. I had all the women. I had all the stuff. He says it's all meaningless. It's all meaningless under the sun. And so there's this pursuit of this singular thing of sex and relationships that will not bring the fulfillment that he was looking for. It's because he wasn't back in the circle. And so you never see a relationship that is polygamous in the Bible produce anything that's good. It always is a mistake. And God never says, that's a great thing, keep getting more wives. You never see that. But what you see is that there's a brokenness that happens, and that brokenness is perpetuated more and more. And so really what we're talking about is, does it seem contradictory? The only thing that's contradictory is what we're doing compared to what God called us to do. We're contradicting the circle by trying to live our lives closer to the line and trying to make sex the most important thing in our life. And so that's why polygamy exists, because you get tired of this person, so you think, I'll add this person, I'll make it better, I'll make this person make it better, I'll make this person make it better, I get a TLC show, all the kind of stuff will start to happen, but it doesn't prove to be true, because there is never enough of that, because the circle is where intimacy and happiness is supposed to be, and joy is found in. So
it's like Songs of Solomon kind of stands out to me as a book that is really potent for these ideas. I think one thing that he says in Songs of Solomon is be content with the wife of your youth. And God has designed us to pursue one person, to build intimacy with that one person, both physically and spiritually, has designed us to do that. And the most appropriate next response is to stick with that individual for the lifetime. And any of the examples that we list of a polygamy throughout the Bible is examples of real brokenness, and it did not turn out very well for any of those relationships. And so I would say it's not a proof that, oh my gosh, here's some contradiction, but it's a matter of just like, here's some examples of how messed up it can get when you add all these different people to the originally God intended relationship of one man, one woman.
Well, it looks like we got time for about one more.
I think so. Let me see if I can't figure out which one would be the best.
And the questions were great, by the way. Super appreciate your honesty, and And although we can't get to them all today, maybe we'll do a part 2 and be able to do more of them. But we just appreciate your questions.
Yeah, thanks for participating with us throughout this particular experiment where we're doing these live streams. So I guess I'll end with this question. How can teenage boys curb the hormonal rage and not take care of it themselves? Isn't that just normal for that age?
Yeah, well, you've worked with students for a lot of years,
Yeah.
so I'd love to hear your opinion on
Yeah,
this.
I would say I think Proverbs talks about how should not awaken the sexual feelings before they are ready, and so there's a sense of which paying attention. So it sounds like this is a parent that's asking this question, but paying attention to, are you making sure that they're protected from falling into that temptation? Most kids' first exposure to pornography is around the age of 8. And so are we having a conversation with them about what pornography and what sexuality is, why we should avoid it? Are we setting a vision for God's design for sex? Or are we avoiding it because it seems like an uncomfortable topic to get into with an 8-year-old? And I totally get it. That is an uncomfortable topic. Yeah. But our discomfort is keeping us from protecting our kids from greater dysfunction. Now, let's imagine for a second that the person who's asking this question, they were already down the line, right? They've found their phone, they've looked at their search history. It is not looking good whatsoever. I wouldn't give the out there. It's like, this is just part about being a teenage boy or being a teenage girl for that matter. I think that there is a increasing drive to have more and more pornography, and I think that you need to take this as seriously as you would if you found needles in the house, if you found any type of substance that they're abusing, because the reality of pornography addiction is that it can grow to be destructive and dangerous. How they view pornography and what type of pornography they view gets more and more dangerous, more and more physical, more and more violent, and that brings a sense of expectation to whatever marital relationship that they have. So if you want them to treat their spouse well someday in sexual relationship, pay attention to what they're viewing now. Masturbation and pursuing pornography at this age, you could write off as, you know what, this is just no big deal. This is just something that they deal with. It's a thing that's just part of that age. Mm-hmm. If you're letting them get into that now, you're actually rewiring their brain for it later. And you're bringing all of these different women or men into a future relationship that's going to cause huge destruction. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, in just a couple minutes we have left, I would just say, just because, as you said, like the teenage boy, like a hormonal rate, just because this might be something that's happening doesn't mean it's the right thing. It doesn't mean that we have to. I think that what we need to teach our kids a lot about is self-control and patience and understanding purity and or sexual integrity. Like, these are really good conversations to have, instead of just saying, oh, boys will be boys, because boys that'll be boys will turn into men that'll be men, and that could turn them into not good things. So we need to have the end in mind, not just the moment. We need to think of, how are we parenting our kids beyond just this moment of, how do we just make them feel good in this moment or get past this, or it is what it is, they'll grow out of it. How are we parenting them? How are we raising them and taking opportunities to show patience and grace with them as they do it, but to show them that it doesn't have to be this way?
Yeah, that's good. I want to end with this real quick. The next one was like some resources you might want to look at. One book that I look at is kind of a philosophical look at sexuality from a Christian perspective, Divine Sex by Jonathan Grant. Another one I would suggest, if there's past abuse that has happened sexually, Sacred Heart by Dan Allender is a really good resource. And then people struggling with facing pornography, or maybe someone who wants to overcome their battle with pornography, resources by Patrick Carnes. He's not a Christian, but he's a leading PhD guy in this particular field. He wrote a book called Facing the Shadows. He also has a workbook that goes with it. I've taken students throughout that workbook, and it's powerful to see how God would transform someone's life. Of course, CR is a great resource that we have here at the church.
And we'll put all these links in there to the chat too also, and maybe Ashley go varsity and give you like Amazon links to them.
There you go.
So
yeah, that's good. Well, Pastor Brian, that really just kind of concludes our conversation about sexuality.
Yeah.
But please give me a heads up for what we have looking forward to this upcoming weekend.
Well, we end the series this
Wow.
weekend. So Face Up Relationships end 4 weeks in. We've already done dating, we've done finance, we've done sex. What could possibly be next? We've got parenting. We're going to be looking at parenting. And again, you might be saying, well, gosh, I don't have kids. I don't, someday you probably will. Statistically, it says that you probably will, or you'll be around kids and you'll have an opportunity to influence. And so what we really want to look at is, what does it look like to be face up with our spouse when it comes to parenting? How are we on the same page? How are we moving in the right direction? But not just in our own personal, but what does God want us to do? So I would invite you to be there. And also on top of that, I mean, this isn't any secret, baptism weekend this week. So if you have ever considered being baptized, or maybe you want to make a statement for your kids about where you stand in your faith, get baptized. Get baptized together. We'll help you dunk each other. It's going to be an amazing weekend. We've already got people talking about doing it, but I'd encourage you to be a part of that. Come, be involved. It's also our fall kickoff, so it's a great chance for you and your family to hang out together. We'll have bounce houses and food, and Dan's going to eat an entire Giordano's pizza without breathing. It's going to be so great.
I'll just puke it up.
We want to invite you guys to be a part of it, and don't miss out on this, because I think the end of the series is going to just be as powerful as the rest of them, and we want to see it. And join us next week, because we'll be doing our last Q&A.
That's right. Well, guys, hey, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Pastor Brian,
Always.
for this incredible conversation that we'll be able to have. Hey, I'd encourage you, if you haven't already, to listen to Pastor Brian's message from this past week. Go to crossroadsgrace.org/services, or you could look at our Facebook page or YouTube page and check out week 3 about sex for face-up relationships. And then I would encourage you, if you felt like this was valuable to you, or if you feel like it might be valuable to someone else as well, I'd encourage you to share it with them, because we want to make sure that God's truth, God's way, is shared with as many people as possible. Guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Tag, you're it.
just wanna dance for the hell of it, hell of it. Wanna take a chance for the thrill of it, thrill of it. Wanna raise my hands 'cause I'm feeling it, feeling it. Are you feeling this? Are you feeling this? Oh, you only got one life, so make it feel like sunshine. I feel the sun on my face, it's a brand new day, and it's telling me it'll all be okay. All the clouds and the rain, that's of yesterday. Yeah, I'm telling you, it'll all be okay. It's a good day. It's a good day. I just wanna move to the rhythm of my own beat. Wanna clap my hands, flip my hair, start my beat. Wanna make 'em stare 'cause I'm radiant, radiant. Shining everywhere, shining everywhere. I feel the sun on my face, it's a brand new day, and it's telling me it'll all be okay. All the clouds and the rain, that's of yesterday. Yeah, I'm telling you, it'll all be okay. It's a good day. It's a good day. Oh, I only got one life, so I'm gonna make it mine. Oh, when it's about that time,